The night was heavy with rain, a cold drizzle soaking the asphalt and making the neon lights of the gas station shimmer like ghosts on the pavement. The streets of Los Angeles, usually pulsing with life, felt eerily empty, except for the occasional car that pulled in, filled up, and disappeared into the darkness. The air carried the scent of gasoline, damp concrete, and exhaustion. Emily wiped a tired hand across her forehead, pushing away loose strands of hair that had stuck to her damp skin. 7 months pregnant and working a double shift, she moved between the gas pumps like a machine, efficient, silent, and running on fumes. She barely felt the cold anymore. The aches in her lower back had long since become background noise, just another part of survival. She didn't have the luxury of slowing down. A low rumble sliced through the quiet. The sound of a motorcycle engine, deep and controlled, rolling into the station like a predator stalking its prey. Emily glanced up instinctively. A sleek black bike pulled to a stop at Pump 4, its rider a shadowy figure dressed in black leather. The rain had darkened his jacket, beads of water running off his shoulders as he swung his leg over the bike and planted his boots on the ground. He moved with an effortless grace, peeling off his helmet to reveal dark, slightly disheveled hair, rain-kissed and tousled. Keanu Reeves. Emily felt her stomach clench, not from nerves, not from excitement, but from something deeper. A strange flicker of awareness, a shift in the air, as if the universe had decided to pause for just a second. She had seen his face before, on screens, in magazines, but here, under the dim glow of the gas station lights, he wasn't a movie star. He was just a man, quiet, observant, and for some reason, looking directly at her. Sophia, sitting on a plastic chair under the awning, barely noticed. Her small fingers clutched a red pencil, sketching intently in her worn notebook, oblivious to the rain, the cold, or the stranger watching from across the station. Emily exhaled, trying to shake the moment off. A customer was a customer. No different than the dozen she had already served tonight. She grabbed the windshield cleaner, stepping toward the closest car when suddenly, crash. The sound tore through the air, sharp and violent. A metal cart had tipped over near the convenience store entrance, sending a case of glass bottles shattering across the pavement. The noise startled Sophia, making her jump in her seat, her pencil slipping from her fingers. Emily turned sharply, instinct kicking in, her pulse spiking with alarm. From where he stood, Keanu didn't move, but his eyes tracked everything, the way Emily instinctively stepped in front of Sophia, the way her breath hitched before she forced herself to keep moving. A second later, the night settled again. The rain, the hum of engines, the distant honk of a car. Just another night in a city that never cared who struggled to survive. But something had changed. Keanu's gaze lingered on Emily as she bent to pick up Sophia's fallen pencil, offering it back to her with a tired but reassuring smile. It was a small moment, one of thousands she probably had in a day, but to him, it said everything. She was exhausted. She was breaking. And she had no choice but to keep going. Something about that didn't sit right with him. And he wasn't the kind of man to walk away. Keanu watched as Emily straightened, pushing a damp strand of hair behind her ear, her movements quick but weary. She had the kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue, the kind that settled in the bones, carved itself into the lines around her eyes, and made every breath feel like a chore. She glanced his way once, hesitated, then turned back to her work, pretending not to notice him. But he noticed her. He stepped toward the small awning where Sophia sat, her red pencil moving in short, determined strokes across the weathered pages of her notebook. She was hunched over, completely lost in her own world. Keanu crouched beside her, his voice gentle but curious. "What are you drawing?" Sophia startled slightly, her fingers tightening around the pencil before she glanced up. Her big brown eyes studied him, recognition flickering across her face, but she didn't react the way most people did. No excitement. No starstruck amazement. Just quiet observation, as if she were assessing whether or not he was worth talking to. Finally, she held up the page. It was a drawing of a small restaurant, warm and inviting, with a sign above the door. Inside, tiny figures sat at tables while a woman stood behind a counter, her hands busy preparing food. Keanu tilted his head. Looks nice. What's it called? Sophia hesitated, pressing her lips together before answering softly. I don't know yet. It's my mom's restaurant, but only in my drawings. Something about the way she said it made Keanu glance back at Emily. She was at the next pump, wiping a windshield with methodical movements, offering the driver a polite smile despite the exhaustion dragging at her limbs. He could see it now, the way she moved, the way she forced herself to keep going. She wasn't just working a job. She was surviving. He turned back to Sophia, his voice steady. Has your mom always wanted a restaurant? Sophia nodded, tracing the outline of the tiny figure behind the counter. She used to talk about it all the time. She said she had recipes from my great-grandma, special ones that nobody else knows how to make. She said food makes people happy. But then, life got hard. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that didn't belong in a child's voice. She doesn't talk about it anymore. Keanu let that settle. The rain drummed lightly against the awning, the hum of the city a distant murmur. He didn't know this woman. He didn't know her past, her mistakes, her reasons for being here. But what he did know was that some dreams weren't meant to be buried. A car horn honked impatiently at the next pump, snapping them both out of the moment. Emily turned at the sound, her shoulders stiffening before she hurried over. The moment she passed Sophia, she brushed her fingers lightly against the little girl's shoulder, a silent, instinctive reassurance. I'm here. I'm always here. Keanu recognized that kind of love. The kind that sacrificed everything. He stood, stepping back as Emily returned to check the fuel meter. Up close, he could see the fatigue etched into her face, the way her hands trembled slightly from the strain of a long shift. Her uniform was thin, not nearly warm enough for the cold drizzle that clung to the night air. She glanced at him. She's not bothering you, is she? She's not, Keanu said simply. Actually, she was just telling me about your restaurant. Emily froze for a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted to Sophia, then back to him, guarded now. It's nothing, she said quickly. Just a silly thing I used to dream about. Keanu didn't miss the way her voice dipped, how the words came out rushed, like she was trying to dismiss them before they had the chance to hurt. He'd heard that tone before. The way people spoke about things they had loved once, before the world convinced them it wasn't possible. What kind of food, he asked, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily blinked, caught off guard. She hesitated, then shrugged. Italian. My grandmother was from Naples. She taught me how to make lasagna, real lasagna, not the frozen stuff people buy in stores. For the first time, there was a flicker of something behind her exhaustion. A memory, a warmth. She always said you could tell a good chef by how they layered the sauce. Keanu nodded, tucking that detail away. Sounds amazing. Emily exhaled a small laugh, shaking her head. Yeah, well. Doesn't pay the bills. Maybe not yet. She looked at him then, a crease forming between her brows. Why are you asking all this? Keanu considered his answer carefully. He could see it in her eyes, the weariness, the hesitation, the absolute certainty that no one in this world did anything without expecting something in return. So he just smiled, stepping back toward his bike. Just curious. Emily watched him for a long second before shaking her head and turning away. The conversation was over. Or at least, that's what she thought. But as Keanu pulled his helmet back on, his mind was already working, piecing things together. He didn't believe in coincidence. He didn't believe in walking away when something didn't sit right. And right now, nothing about this sat right with him. This woman had been given nothing but obstacles. A life that had forced her to survive instead of dream. And Keanu wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way Sophia held on to that red pencil like it was the only piece of hope she had left, or the way Emily's voice softened when she talked about lasagna, but he knew one thing. He wasn't done here. Not even close. Keanu didn't come back the next night. Or the night after that. Emily told herself it didn't matter. He was just another customer, another passing stranger in a city full of them. But a small part of her, the part that once dared to dream before reality crushed it, found herself thinking about their conversation. About the way he had looked at her, not with pity, but with something else. Something she couldn't quite name. Then, 3 nights later, as she wiped down a pump under the flickering neon lights, she heard it again, that deep, familiar rumble of an engine rolling into the station. She didn't turn immediately, but she knew. Keanu Reeves was back. This time, he wasn't empty-handed. He pulled off his helmet, shaking the rain from his hair, and reached into the side compartment of his bike, pulling out 2 large paper bags. The scent of something warm and fresh drifted through the air as he walked toward her. She straightened, wiping her hands on her uniform, her tired eyes narrowing slightly. "You're back," she said, more surprised than she meant to sound. "I said I'd see you again," Keanu replied simply, holding up the bags. "Figured you could use something other than gas station sandwiches." Emily hesitated. The offer was unexpected. Unfamiliar. People didn't do things like this for her. But the aroma was undeniable: roasted vegetables, fresh bread, something rich and comforting beneath the layers. And she was starving. Sophia peeked up from her drawing, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the food. Keanu set the bags down on a nearby bench and reached into one, pulling out a neatly wrapped sandwich. He handed it to Sophia first. "For the artist," he said with a smile. Sophia grinned, taking it with both hands, as if it were a treasure. Then he turned to Emily, offering another. "No strings attached," he added, reading the hesitation in her face. "Just eat." Emily swallowed, her pride warring with her hunger. But then she saw Sophia already unwrapping hers, taking a bite with an expression of pure joy, and something in her cracked. She took the sandwich. "Thanks," she murmured, sitting down on the bench, the exhaustion of the night finally catching up to her. For a while, there was only silence, the quiet sound of rain, the occasional whoosh of a car pulling in, the rhythmic scratching of Sophia's pencil on paper. Keanu sat across from them, casual, comfortable, as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. Emily finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" Keanu took a sip from the coffee he'd brought for himself, considering his words. "Because I can." She studied him, waiting for more, but that was all he said. She shook her head, taking another bite of her sandwich. "People don't just do things for others without expecting something back." Keanu smiled, but there was something serious in his eyes. "Maybe they should." Emily didn't have an answer to that. Sophia, meanwhile, was happily munching away, flipping through the pages of her notebook. "This is so good," she mumbled around a mouthful. "Thank you, Mr. Keanu," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome." Emily exhaled, glancing down at the paper bag beside her. She expected it to be just food, but when she looked inside, something else caught her eye, a small, crisp envelope tucked between the containers. She pulled it out cautiously, flipping it over. A single word was written on the front: opportunity. Her pulse kicked up. She slid her thumb under the seal and pulled out a flyer, its edges slightly worn from being carried around. The words at the top made her breath catch. "Culinary training program for single mothers, enrollment open now." She stared at it, her mind blanking for a second. Then she looked up at Keanu, suspicion creeping in. "What is this?" "An opportunity," he said simply. She shook her head, a sudden knot forming in her chest. I can't afford this. It's free, Keanu countered. Full scholarship. Covers everything. Ingredients, training, even business skills. Emily felt the paper tremble slightly in her fingers. Why are you giving this to me? Because Sophia told me you were a great cook, Keanu said, leaning back against the bench. And because I think she's right. Emily let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. That was a long time ago. Doesn't mean it's gone. She gripped the flyer tighter, her emotions warring inside her. She wanted to believe it. Wanted to imagine a future where she wasn't stuck in a dead-end job, working herself to the bone just to survive. But reality had a way of reminding her of where she belonged. I don't have time for this, she said finally, her voice harder than she intended. I have to work. I have a daughter to take care of. I can't just. That's exactly why you should do it, Keanu interrupted, his voice calm but firm. For her. Emily fell silent. Beside her, Sophia had stopped drawing. She was watching her mother now, waiting. Hoping. Emily swallowed hard, looking down at the flyer again. Her fingers traced the bold letters, the words staring back at her like a challenge. She had spent so long telling herself no. So long believing that dreams were for other people. But now, for the first time in years, she was being given a choice. And she didn't know what to do with it. Emily stared at the flyer in her hands, the words blurring slightly as the weight of the moment settled in. It felt unreal. Opportunities like this didn't just appear out of nowhere, especially not for people like her. People who had long since stopped hoping. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe it was possible. But reality had always been merciless, and she knew better than to let herself get carried away. I don't know, she murmured, more to herself than to Keanu. Keanu watched her carefully, reading the hesitation in her posture, the doubt tightening her grip on the paper. He didn't push. Instead, he simply nodded. Think about it. Emily exhaled slowly. That was the problem, thinking about it meant wanting it. And wanting it meant risking disappointment. The night ended without another word about the program. But the next morning, when Emily woke up and saw the flyer still sitting on her kitchen counter, she knew she wouldn't be able to ignore it. Something had shifted. Something was already changing. Days passed. She found herself looking at the paper more and more, tracing the bold letters, picturing herself in a kitchen again, not just cooking to survive, but cooking because she loved it. She thought about Sophia's drawing, about the little restaurant her daughter had imagined before Emily had even dared to. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed the number at the bottom of the page. 3 weeks later, Emily stood in a gleaming kitchen, a crisp white apron tied around her waist, her fingers dusted with flour. It felt strange at first, being in a space where people wanted her to succeed. Where she wasn't invisible, just another struggling worker going through the motions. Here, she was a student, a chef in training, someone who was allowed to dream. It wasn't easy. The first few days were overwhelming, so much to learn, so many techniques she hadn't used in years. There were moments she wanted to walk away, convinced she didn't belong. But then, she'd hear Sophia's excited voice when she got home, asking, "What did you learn today, Mama?" And just like that, she'd remember why she had taken this step in the first place. Keanu never asked if she had enrolled, but he knew. He saw it in the way she carried herself the next time he stopped by the gas station, her posture just a little straighter, her eyes holding something they hadn't before, determination. She didn't thank him, not directly, but she didn't have to. He saw it in the way she worked harder, in the way she didn't give up when things got tough. And as Emily sharpened her skills, pushing herself past the limits she had once believed were set in stone, Keanu was working on something else, something she had no idea about. While she perfected her sauces and mastered the delicate art of fresh pasta, Keanu was making calls. He reached out to people he trusted, people who believed in giving chances to those who deserved them. He found a space, a small but perfect spot in the heart of the city, tucked between bustling cafes and hidden gems. A place that, with the right touch, could become something extraordinary. The night he took her there, she didn't understand at first. She thought maybe it was a new restaurant he liked, a place he wanted to show her. But then she saw the sign. La Cucina della Nonna. Emily froze. The name stared back at her, her grandmother's name, her dream, her impossible wish written in elegant script above the door. She felt the world tilt, her breath catching in her throat. She turned to Keanu, but words failed her. "This is yours," he said simply. Her knees almost gave out. She shook her head, stepping back. "No. No, I can't, this is too much." Keanu smiled, a calm, steady reassurance in his voice. "It's exactly what you deserve." Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She couldn't process it. I don't know how to run a restaurant," she whispered. "That's why you took the class," Keanu reminded her gently. "You've already started. And you're not doing this alone." She looked back at the building, at the warm lights glowing from inside. She could almost see it already, the tables filled with people, the kitchen alive with energy, Sophia sitting in the corner, drawing menus just like she used to in her notebook. It was terrifying. It was impossible. And yet, standing there in the glow of the streetlights, for the first time in her life, it felt real. Keanu stepped back, letting her take it in. He didn't tell her what to do. This choice had to be hers. Emily took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the door handle. And then, slowly, she pushed it open. The scent of fresh wood and possibility filled the air as Emily stepped inside. The space was empty but brimming with potential. The countertops gleamed under the soft golden glow of the overhead lights. The kitchen, her kitchen, stood ready, waiting for the hands of someone who understood the language of food, of tradition, of love. She ran her fingers over the smooth stainless steel, still not quite believing it was real. The room felt alive, like it had been waiting for her. And yet, fear curled in her chest. A voice inside her whispered, "What if I fail? What if this is too much?" But then she turned and saw Sophia standing in the doorway, clutching her sketchbook, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mama," she breathed, stepping further inside, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden tables. "This is just like my drawing." Emily swallowed hard. It really was. She looked back at Keanu, who stood by the entrance, watching her with that calm patience he always carried. He wasn't pushing her. He wasn't telling her what to do. He had given her a choice. A chance. And now, the next step was hers to take. She exhaled, her pulse hammering. "What if I'm not ready?" Keanu shrugged. "No one's ever ready for the things that matter. You just start. And you figure it out as you go." Emily let those words settle. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She had spent so long running on survival mode, thinking only about the next bill, the next shift, the next long, sleepless night. But standing here, in a restaurant with her grandmother's name on the door, she realized something. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Sophia. About giving her a different life. About showing her that dreams weren't just things you scribbled in a notebook, only to close the cover and forget. It was about breaking the cycle. A deep breath. A slow nod. And then, finally, the smallest of smiles. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Keanu grinned. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Emily threw herself into the work, ordering supplies, fine-tuning recipes, learning the ins and outs of running a business. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and some nights she still lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake. But something was different now. The exhaustion wasn't hopeless anymore. It wasn't just an endless cycle of getting through the day. Now, there was purpose in it. And then, before she knew it, opening night arrived. The restaurant was warm and inviting, the soft hum of conversation filling the air as people filtered in, drawn by the promise of homemade food and the kind of atmosphere that made you want to stay a little longer. Sophia buzzed with excitement, sitting at a small table near the entrance, handing out menus she had helped design. Emily, standing in the kitchen, took a deep breath, wiping her palms against her apron. The first order came in, lasagna. Of course, it was lasagna. The dish that had started it all. She moved on instinct, her hands steady as she layered the sauce, the pasta, the cheese, each motion careful, deliberate, filled with the love her grandmother had once taught her. She sent the plate out, and then another. And another. And then, finally, she stepped into the dining area. Keanu was sitting at a corner table, watching quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. Emily crossed the room and set a plate of lasagna down in front of him, raising an eyebrow. "You keep showing up," she said. He picked up his fork, meeting her gaze. "Well," he said, taking a bite. "I wouldn't miss history being made." Emily let out a breath of laughter, something light and genuine. She turned, looking around at the restaurant, her restaurant, filled with people, with warmth, with life. This was real. And it was just the beginning. Keanu stayed for a while, but as the night went on, Emily noticed him stand, place a few bills on the table, and make his way toward the door. She followed. "You're leaving?" she asked, even though she already knew the answer. Keanu nodded, pulling on his jacket. "This is your story now." Emily hesitated. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that none of this would have happened without him, that she didn't know how to repay him. But then she realized, that wasn't what he wanted. Instead, she gave him a look, one filled with something unspoken but understood. "I'll see you around, Emily," Keanu said softly. And then he was gone. Emily stood at the doorway for a long time, watching the taillight of his motorcycle disappear into the night. Then, slowly, she turned back to the warmth of the restaurant, where Sophia was waiting for her, where laughter and conversation filled the air. She had spent so long fighting to survive. Now, she was finally living.